Leopard geckos versus crested geckos. These are two very popular and very easy beginner lizards here, but there are still a ton of differences between them, so we can go ahead and jump straight into comparing everything about them to try and help you make a better decision as to which beginner lizard is perfect for you. First, let's just talk a bit about their characteristics. Here, this is a leopard gecko. They're from much drier areas, and they really just hang out on the ground. You're not going to see them climbing very much, and they like to hang out and hide under stuff, find their insects, sleep, and that's about it. They're considered crepuscular, so they hang out mostly during dawn and dusk, compared to a nocturnal animal at night and a diurnal during the day. And then crested geckos are considered semi-arboreal, so they're going to be found a lot more in trees or up high areas naturally, because that's just where they feel comfortable. They're from much more tropical and humid places, and unlike the leopard geckos, they are nocturnal. So neither of them are diurnal, crepuscular, nocturnal. Of course, they're different. Not super different when it comes to care. We can go into that just a little bit later. Now, we'll go ahead and get more into the actual geckos themselves in just a minute, but firstly, let's talk about something that you're all going to want to know about, that being money, and just how much it costs to keep each of these lizards. You can't fall. Now, because these have been in the pet trade for so long, and they're just so popular now, it's really not at all difficult to find them, and they are quite cheap now. You can find a normal leopard or crested gecko just around the $20 to $40 range, depending on where you are and what places you have available. Remember to do everything you can to avoid the big pet stores, which we've talked about, and a few other videos. If you don't know, you can go watch those, which are linked below or in the card above. But even avoiding big stores like Petco or PetSmart or whatever, you can still find them for extremely cheap. I would say you can pretty much always expect to find one of these for under $50. Leopard geckos, however, come in a ton of different morphs and paint jobs and variations, so pretty much think of any pattern and color, and it probably exists. Now, it's not necessarily in budget. These can get up into the thousands of dollars. Meanwhile, crested geckos, there's still quite a few variations. There aren't as many right now. I'm sure we'll see more pop up in the future as they're bred more, but the most expensive of them go up into the hundreds compared to in the thousands. Either way, you'll always be able to find one that is... He's breathing in my ear. But either way, I'm pretty confident that you'll be able to find a leopard or a crested gecko with colors and patterns that really appeal to you and what you're looking for. Now we can talk more about the geckos themselves and the kinds of setups that they're going to need. Leopard geckos are land-dwelling species. They just like to hang out on the ground, hide in places, find their food, do their thing, all down on the surface of the earth. Meanwhile, crested geckos are going to feel much more comfortable when they can be elevated up in trees because they are semi-arboreal compared to just a land-dwelling animal. Usually when people think of geckos, you think of something closer to a crested because they're these like sticky, padded feet, climby dudes, which he definitely is. But leopard geckos do not have those. They just have these little claws that definitely help them grab some things if they really have to climb something. But overall, that's not something they're interested in. So this means that they're going to want a bit more, I guess, floor space compared to that of a crested gecko. But this is still super manageable. It's really small enclosures. I went completely into their care with separate videos and guides, which you can find below. And then crested geckos, as you can see, they are definitely much more jumpy. You gotta keep your eye on them at all times because they are semi-arboreal and they like that space that they can hang out up higher. For those reasons, you're going to want a more vertical enclosure for them. Now, the actual enclosure sizes are pretty alike with both species, but crested geckos are going to want more height, and leopard geckos are going to want more length or width with their enclosure. Now, the leopards are from very dry and arid places, so they're going to want lower humidity to do their thing. Meanwhile, crested geckos are from much more tropical, high humidity areas, so they're going to require more moisture in the enclosure. What I found is that they need daily maintenance, while leopard geckos can probably go a couple days between needing certain things. For example, crested geckos, they're not big into using water bowls even. They just like to lick water off the surface of leaves or their face or the side of the enclosure. So for that reason, they're going to need a lot more mistings. I mist his enclosure twice a day to make sure that the moisture stays perfect for him in there. Meanwhile, leopard geckos do need higher moisture. Here, just hop on the mic. Woo. Meanwhile, the leopard geckos, they do need higher moisture while they're shedding, but this is very easy to do with a shed box, which I talked about in the other care videos. But overall, their enclosure does not require as much moisture maintenance. You don't have to spray their enclosure, and it depends on where you are a bit, but generally it's much easier to keep a lower humidity enclosure compared to that of a high humidity. Now when you think of more arid climates, you probably think of higher temperatures, which makes sense. Leopard geckos need temperatures that are much hotter than the average room. I don't know if anyone's room is kept around 90 degrees. So although it probably doesn't take as many days out of the week to set up and keep their enclosure going, they're going to need more to it, like different types of heating, depending on just what your temperatures are like. Meanwhile, crested geckos can pretty much always just sit at room temperature. Of course it varies, and this is not just a care video in itself. You should make sure you figure out the perfect temperatures for your gecko to make sure they're good. But generally speaking, cresteds do not actually need any extra heating in the enclosure, just moisture. Meanwhile, the leopard geckos can go without that, and they just need a lot of additional heating based on how your setup is. Now, like I said, leopard geckos are crepuscular, while these guys are nocturnal. So neither of them actually really hang out during the day, unless you wake them up for a video. But that doesn't mean you don't want any type of lighting on them at all. They don't exactly want to be in the pitch black 24 hours a day, just like how people wouldn't want to be in the sun 24 hours a day. However, you don't actually need dedicated lighting for either of them, because usually, just like this, ambient lighting, it's just enough for the enclosure. You can stick a light on depending on what you have, but that's just one of the many things that overlaps with their enclosure. So quick rundown, leopard geckos are into drier, hotter, and wider or longer enclosures, while crested geckos can be in more cooler, vertical, higher humidity enclosures. Next up, let's talk about food. Let's start with leopard geckos. They are insectivores, so they're just going to be eating bugs their whole life. You've got lots of options with them, whether it's crickets or mealworms or dubia roaches. There's all sorts of pros and cons to each. I'm feeding my geckos dubias right now, while crested geckos don't actually need any live insects if you pick the right food. I would argue that they're easier to feed, even though you do have to feed them more often. Ideally, they're always going to have food available 24 hours a day, which you'll swap out each day, but you don't have to keep any live insects or have to supplement those insects. You just have to take the powder, add water, mix it up, and you're good to go. But leopard geckos, they do need the live insects. You can't expect them to really eat anything that's not moving, and dead or freeze-dried insects are not going to have as much nutrition. And in addition to this, leopard geckos are going to need their supplements. We won't go into the details here, but different things like calcium and D3 and other vitamins are important to keep them healthy and growing properly, while crested geckos just have that all mixed into the pre-made formulas that you can buy for them. So generally, it's fewer feedings with leopard geckos per week. However, it's a bit more of a complicated diet. Definitely something that's manageable if that's what you're interested in. For crested geckos do just have that simple powder where you can buy as much as you want. It'll last for quite a while and is very easy to prepare and feed to them. Let's talk about something else important. I guess all of this is important, but that is the temperament of each of these species. You can just see how overall they're really laid back here. They're kind of looking around, exploring and seeing what's going on, but they're both very easily manageable when it comes to handling them, which is usually something that's quite important to people that want to keep one. As you saw, crested geckos tend to be a bit jumpier. They have those skills because they can hop from branch to branch or whatever up in the trees, while leopard geckos can be pretty fast, but overall they're just gonna kind of climb around on you with their little claws. They can both drop their tails. This is not necessarily a big deal with crested geckos, and if you don't know, dropping the tail is just when they literally, if something pulls on the tail a bit too hard and it scares them, they can just release that thing so that they can run away. It's essentially a defense mechanism. Crested geckos cannot grow this back, so once the tail is gone, it's gone forever. You can actually buy geckos with pre-dropped tails basically for a little bit cheaper because they tend to be less appealing since they're a bit shorter and stubbier. It's not a huge difference, it won't affect their health. However, leopard geckos can do the same thing. I've never had any of my animals drop their tails, but if a leopard gecko is startled and something has latched onto its tail, it's also going to release it. You can see that this tail is much fatter than that of a crested gecko because that's where they store their fat and a lot of their nutrients. So it's a much bigger deal if a crested gecko drops it because it's essentially losing a lot of their power supply. However, crested geckos can replenish that, and their tails do regenerate and grow back. That might look a little lumpy or weird when they come back, and neither of these things are something huge to worry about. If that is a concern, it shouldn't stop you from buying them. It's just being careful when you're handling them and being aware that they are capable, you're making this difficult, that they are capable of doing that. But anyway, with handling, it's easier when you're not trying to record a video at the same time. with more than one gecko. There we go. But a lot of the temperament will be based entirely on the personality. For example, this is one of the newer geckos here. She is perfectly fine with handling. She's a bit fast. She doesn't seem to mind it at all though. Meanwhile, my other leopard gecko, Goldie, who's back there, he's really not big into handling. He just gets kind of annoyed by it. Now, you can change this based on how much time you spend with them to tame them down and bring their tolerance up so they're more used to it. And then same with the Crested Geckos. It will vary depending on each, but overall, it's not going to be very difficult at all. The more you work with them, the easier it'll be. These are both very small geckos. They stay just about the same size, usually around 8 inches, unless you get a giant or super giant leopard gecko. And their bites, it's like no big deal at all. This guy, he bit me on the first day. You couldn't even tell it was a bite. It was like that. That's it. And then leopard geckos, they do have some tiny teeth. I've never even been bitten by one, and I've been keeping them for years now. And even if they do, it's nothing to be concerned about. So if you're new to handling reptiles or keeping them, both of these species are going to be super easy to handle and get used to. And hopefully him walking on the microphone isn't ruining my audio. So if you're looking for an animal that you can easily handle, I think either of these will work just fine. They might need a little bit of getting used to it, but overall, taming them down or raising their tolerance to handling and being messed with is not very difficult with either of these species. It's probably some of the easiest that you can do it with. Again, Cresties tend to be a bit jumpier, leopard geckos tend to be a bit faster, but either way, if one of them appeals to you more than the other, I think you'll be just fine going with it. These are by far two of the best options that you can pick from if you are new to animals. One of the great things about them being common is, although they're kind of everywhere, and not necessarily unique just because kind of everyone has one, it also means that it's very easy to reach out and find people to help you, or that have had their own experiences with the species that can really help guide you in the right direction when caring for them. At this point, I think people have essentially nailed their husbandry so they live a super long time, and it's very easy and not super expensive to duplicate. Again, I have a ton of care stuff on leopard geckos. Hopefully at some point there will be the same for cresteds on the channel. Depending on how new this video is, they might already be up. Who knows, you can go search around the Go Herping channel. But today we've been comparing two of the most popular, probably the two most popular geckos, and two of the most popular reptiles in the entire pet trade. I'm sure I missed some other stuff, so if you know any others, make sure to leave them in the comments to help others out with this video, and let me know of anything that I missed. Which one are you aiming towards? Is there a specific one? Have you already chosen? And if you have, I don't know why you're watching this. So unfortunately, I can't give you a definite answer as to which one is better. That's going to be up to you. Hopefully you are now closer to your answer, but let me know what you're thinking in the comments of this video. So that should be it. Check the description for a ton of resources with different useful links and videos and kits and all sorts of things. But that'll be it for this video. So I'm Alex, and thanks for watching.